All right, so again, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Whitney Code, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Dash, and this meeting is being recorded.
Buenas noches a todos y gracias por acompañarnos esta noche. Mi nombre es Whitney Code. Soy la gerente de Mercadeo y Comunicaciones aquí en Dash. Para su información, esta reunión está siendo grabada.
እንዴት አመሻችሁ የዚህ የዙም ስብሰባ ተካፋዮች። ስሜ ዊትኒ ኮድ ይባላል። በዚህ የዳሽ መስሪያ ቤት የገበያና የጥናት ክፍል መረጃ አገልግሎት ማኔጀር ነኝ። ይህ ስብሰባ ለተመልካቾች በሚጠቅም ሁኔታ ቀረጻ ይደረጋል።
Tonight, we're here to share information on proposed Dash policies designed to make sure the Dash bus service is provided in a fair and equitable manner to all members of the Alexandria community. So we're here tonight to let you know about the policies and, more importantly, to hear any feedback you may have.
Esta noche estamos aquí para compartir información sobre las políticas Dash, propuestas diseñadas para garantizar el servicio de autobús Dash se brinde de manera justa y equitativa a todos los miembros de la comunidad de Alexandria, por lo que estamos aquí esta noche para informarle sobre las políticas y escuchar cualquier comentario que pueda tener. Las políticas e información que se hace referencia esta noche están disponibles en inglés y en español y amárico en nuestro sitio de web, dash.com. título 6.
ዛሬ ማታ ያለነው ይህንን ማስረጃ አገልግሎት ለማሳተፍ በአዲስ መልክ ተገልጾ ለዳሽ ኮሚኒቲ ለአሌክሳንድሪያ ነዋሪ በሙሉ የባስ አገልግሎት በሚመች መልኩ በአዲስ መንገድ ተቀርጾ ህዝብን ለማሳተፍ ለማወያየት ነው። በዚህ አማካኝነት ማናቸውም የዚህ የባስ ሰርቪስ አገልግሎት ተጠቃሚዎች በሙሉ የእናንተን አስተያየትና የእናንተን እርዳታ ተቀብለን የምንሰጠው አገልግሎት በሚመች በሚያምር በሚሳካ መልኩ ለማሳተፍ ነው።
The policies and information referenced this evening are also available in English, Spanish, and Amharic on our website at www.dashbus.com/Title 6.
Las políticas y la información a las que se hace referencia esta noche están disponibles en inglés, español y amárico en nuestro sitio web en dash.com, título 6.
ይህንን ስብሰባ በተመለከተ ይህንን ዛሬ የምናደርገውን ስብሰባ በተመለከተ በእንግሊዘኛ፣ በስፓኒሽ፣ በአማርኛ ቋንቋ በዌብሳይታችን ላይ ይገኛል። የዌብሳይቱ ስም dash.com እንደገና ደግሞ /title ቁጥር 6 ነው። ይህንን መረጃ ለማግኘት በዚህ ዌብሳይት ውስጥ ገብታችሁ መረጃውን ማግኘት ትችላላችሁ።
Now, before we begin, if you weren't already aware, I'd like to make sure you know that we have Spanish and Amharic translators with us tonight to assist as needed. So if you need these services, please let us know now.
Antes de comenzar, me gustaría asegurarme de que sepan que tenemos traductores en español y amárico con nosotros esta noche para ayudar según sea necesario. Entonces, si necesita estos servicios, háganos saber ahora.
ይህንን ስብሰባ ከመጀመራችን በፊት በብዙ ተጠቃሚዎች ዘንድ በስፓኒሽኛ ወይም በአማርኛ ቋንቋ ለመሳተፍ በራሳችሁ ቋንቋ የሚረዳችሁ ሰው ስላለን መሳተፍ የምትፈልጉ በአማርኛ ቋንቋ ስለምናገለግላችሁ እባካችሁ ራሳችሁን አሳውቁን በቋንቋችሁ ስለምንረዳችሁ።
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. And I will now turn it over to our Dash Director of Planning and Marketing, Martin Barna, for this evening's presentation.
Gracias nuevamente por acompañarnos y ahora le paso la palabra a nuestro director de Planificación y Mercadeo de Dash, Martin Barner, para la presentación de esta noche. Gracias.
አሁን ሁላችሁንም በጣም አድርገን እናመሰግናችኋለን። ይህን ስብሰባ ስለተሳተፋችሁ ቀጥዬ ስብሰባው ወደሚመራው የገበያና የጥናት አገልግሎት ኃላፊ ወደሆነው ማርቲን በርና እመራቸዋለሁ።
All right, thank you very much to Whitney and to our translators, Alex and Alberto. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to all of the participants that we have here at tonight's meeting. I do want to go over, we do have a very light agenda that we expect that the meeting will take about 25 minutes or so to get through the content that we have for you tonight. And then we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions and comments. The primary purpose of this evening's meeting is to talk about some proposed Title VI policies, and we'll be getting into those shortly. I do recognize that there may be some other questions about DASH, maybe not related to Title VI. We'd be happy to answer those questions at the end after we've had a chance to go over these policies and take any feedback or questions from the group. So again, thank you to everyone for attending this evening. And I'll just jump right in. So as Whitney mentioned in her introduction, the purpose of this meeting is to present to you several draft Title VI policies that we are developing and to get your questions or feedbacks that you might have on those policies. The DASH in the city of Alexandria, we believe, have a strong track record of providing equitable transit service that benefits all parts of the community. However, these policies will be an additional tool, an additional resource that will help us to quantify and measure how those services and how the service affects different parts of the community, and make sure that we are looking at any decisions that we need to make through that equity lens to make sure that everything is being done in a fair and consistent manner. So that's kind of the high level summary of these policies. I would also note that, excuse me for 1 second. Yes, so that's kind of covers the overall purpose of the meeting. To provide some background, a little more background on these policies, the FTA, which stands for Federal Transit Administration, is the national organization that oversees all transit agencies across the country. DASH is seeking to become eligible to receive funding through the FTA, through the city of Alexandria. And in order to do that, we must comply with all FTA requirements, including Title VI. Title VI is a part of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which expressly prohibits discrimination based on race, ethnicity, color, or nation of origin. And the policies that are required by the FTA must be subjected to public input and must be adopted by the DASH Board of Directors and eventually the City Council. So what we're doing tonight is to make sure that these draft policies make sense, to get any public questions or feedback on the policies. If we need to make any tweaks to the policies, we can do that. And then we'll be sending them on to our Board of Directors and then eventually to the City Council for adoption. So there are two different policies, two larger policies that we're going to be reviewing this evening. The first of these is the Title VI Service Standards and Policies. And again, as Whitney mentioned, these are all available on our website, www.dashbus.com/Title VI. But I will provide a high-level summary for the attendees here in case they have any questions or feedback. So the first policy is this Service Standards and Policies. The main part of this is that DASH must set standards for the performance of its service. We have to provide kind of benchmarks for how we expect our service to perform based on the 4 service metrics shown here: passenger load, vehicle headways, on-time performance, and service availability. The way that this works is that we classify each DASH route as a minority route or a non-minority route based on the characteristics of the area that it serves. And then every couple of years, we are required by the FTA to assess the performance of all of our routes and compare how the minority routes are comparing against the non-minority routes to ensure that there is not a big gap between the two, or that we don't have non-minority routes are performing much higher in these categories than the minority routes. So I'll go through a little more detail each of the standards, but that's kind of a high-level summary of how we are going to be checking the service that we are delivering to make sure that it's being delivered in a fair way. So the first standard is passenger load, and this basically measures the crowding on a bus. If you can imagine a bus where all the seats are filled by passengers, that would be a passenger load of 1.0. It's a ratio of the number of passengers on the bus to the number of available seats. So you can have a ratio that is above 1. If you have, say, a couple of people standing and all the seats are filled, then you might have a ratio of 1.2. So that's what the passenger load ratio is. And we try to keep that under 1 in most cases. But in some cases, it does go above 1 when we have a crowded bus. But generally, I would say if you were to ride a dash bus today, you would probably not see a ratio of more than 0.3 or 0.4 due to the pandemic and low ridership levels right now. However, in certain trips, that may be higher. So that is, I'm showing here the passenger load standard is different for peak, off-peak, and weekend, and different for different types of routes. So you can see that that's shown there. The next standard is headways, which is measured as the number of minutes between successive trips on the same route in the same direction. You can see that we have different types of routes: frequent, local, commuter, and trolley. As you can see here, frequent routes are the ones that come every 15 minutes or better, all day, 7 days a week. So that is the standard that we've used for those, whereas local is a little less frequent, and then commuter type routes may not operate on weekends, and then the trolley is kind of its own type of route, so we have its own standards there. And so we would expect that any route in these categories would meet or exceed these standards. The third standard is on-time performance. The industry standard and typically the DASH standard is about 85% on-time performance. And what this means is that 85% of trips arrive at a time point no more than 1 minute before the scheduled time and no more than 5 minutes after the scheduled time. That's considered to be on time. So we want to make sure that at least 85% of the time that's happening. And that's kind of the standard. And we typically do exceed that standard. So we're going to keep that 85% level as what we would use for this. And then the fourth and final standard is service availability. The way that we measure this is the number of residents that are within a quarter-mile distance of a bus stop. So this is something that's come out of our recent network redesign, the Alexandria Transit Vision Plan and the new DASH network. We really started to pay attention to where people were located and how well they were served by our existing bus network. So there are two different ways that we quantify that. And first is the percentage of people who are within a quarter-mile of a frequent bus stop. So are they within a walking distance of a bus stop that is served by a frequent route? And you can see that our standard is going to be 50% or higher. So at least 1 out of every 2 residents would be within walking distance of a frequent bus stop. And then the second standard is within a quarter-mile of any bus stop. So it may not have frequent service, but there's at least a bus stop within walking distance within a quarter-mile of where they live. So those are and that's above 90%. And you can see how we're doing today with our new DASH network. You can see that 73% of residents in Alexandria are within a quarter-mile of a frequent bus stop, and 95% are within a quarter-mile of any bus stop. I would also note that this is significantly higher than what we had in the old network. Prior to September, these numbers were closer to 20, I think it was 23% of all residents within a quarter-mile of a frequent bus stop. So we've really improved the numbers, especially for minority and low-income groups. Those were also in the 20 percentile, whereas now they're in the 78 and 81 percentile. So we've really improved in this category, and we'd like to keep the numbers high with our new network. So we've established high thresholds of 50 and 90% for this. Okay, the last two for our first policy are vehicle assignments. And the purpose of this is to make sure that we are not assigning our vehicles in a way that puts older vehicles or vehicles that are in poor condition on minority routes in a disproportionate manner. And so we have a policy where most of our dispatching is done based on the bus that is available in the garage at the time of pullout. So it's random, and we've tracked it and determined that there is not a disproportionate number of buses that are being put on minority or non-minority routes. I would also note, however, that we do have some exceptions where we have to put certain buses on certain routes due to operating requirements or branded services. Obviously, we need to put trolleys on the King Street trolley. We have buses that are wrapped in special branding, line 35, so they have to go on line 35. And then there are other routes that are either very narrow, have certain turns that are tighter, so we have to keep smaller buses on them, or there are certain routes that have very high ridership, so we try to put bigger buses on those routes. But outside of those, it's mostly at random, and we've determined that there's not a pattern that would be concerning. And then this last one is passenger amenities. We want to make sure that we're providing bus shelters, benches, trash cans, and real-time displays. We're distributing those across the service area in a fair way. We're not just putting all the real-time signs and shelters in Old Town and ignoring the rest of the city. So we do have some maps on our website that show how the amenities are distributed, and you can see that they are pretty well distributed across the entire city. So the second policy that I will be covering tonight, and maybe I'll just pause for a half second there in case there's any hands or any questions that have come in so far. And I'll just pause. Whitney or Caitlin, let me know if there's anything. Oh, it looks like there is one. Miss Mahan.
Let me unmute myself. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good, thank you. This is looks like it's going to be very informative. You may be getting to this, so I'll just put the question out there. Just looking for a definition of how we are defining minority routes and non-minority routes.
Great question. Great question. And I did skip over that a little bit. That is the definition of minority routes is defined by the FTA, so we don't get to set what that is. What they define it as is a route that has at least 1/3 of its mileage in census blocks that are above the service area average in terms of the number of minority residents. So the way that it works out, there's about, I could bring up the list, but there's I think 4 routes that meet that standard, including line 30 on Duke Street, line 35 in the West End, line 102, which operates along Seminary out to Southern Towers, and then the line 36 AB. I think those are the 4 routes that meet the standard.
Okay. Thank you. And
Sure.
Just to let you know, I am one of the commissioners with the Public Health Advisory Commission, and also a member and one of the architects of the Community Health Improvement Plan. So transportation is a significant part of the CHIP. So we're interested in everything that we can do to support and learn more about what DASH is doing.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
Whitney or Caitlin, maybe we could reach out to Miss Mahan and get her, I guess we already have her email. She's already registered. But perhaps it would be good to connect outside just to make sure that we have that.
Great, thank you. Let me not interrupt your presentation.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you again for the question. Any other questions before I go on to the second policy? Okay. Well, I will keep going then. We've probably got about maybe 5 more minutes, and then I can open up to any other questions. So yes, so the second policy is the DASH Title VI Service Equity Analysis. The purpose of this policy is to evaluate service or fare changes. So anytime we're looking to make a major service change, or if we were to go back, we're not planning on going back to fares, but in the distant future, if we did, this policy would come into play. So there are 3 different parts of this policy. The first is the major service change policy, and that policy determines which service changes would be subject to an equity analysis. The second and third are the procedures that would allow us to assess the impact of the change on minority passengers. That's the disparate impact policy, and then on low-income passengers, and that's the disproportionate burden policy. So we're identifying which changes will be subject to review, and then the second and third policies are how we review those changes to determine if they have an unfair impact. So the major service change policy, we are quantifying service changes. Any service change where we're adding a new route or eliminating a route would certainly qualify. Any change where over 25% of the route mileage or revenue hours are changing, that also would be major. We've included a provision here for cumulative changes. So in the event that we have multiple changes within a 2-year period, we're not just going to make small changes to get around this requirement. And of course, we would never try to get around any requirement. But just to make sure that we're covering all our bases, it is a cumulative 2-year period that if it adds up to over 25% of the route mileage revenue hours in a 2-year period, then that also would be subject to the review. We've also included just any changes that would be that are anticipated to be controversial. So really we can put any change in there. And then also any system-wide change. Maybe there's a lot of small changes on different routes that don't equal 25% on any given route, but overall they're affecting more than 5% of our revenue hours. We'd want to take a look at those as well. There are some exceptions for special events or temporary service that lasts less than 6 months. We would not be subject to review for those. Those are typically kind of one-off things that just are needed due to construction or emergencies. And then just one note, these I talk about service, but any fare change, if we have fares in the future, would be subject to an equity analysis. There's no major fare change. Any fare change is considered to be major. Okay, so disparate impact is taking a look at the service or fare change to see if it has a disparate impact on minority passengers or commuters or communities. The main point with this one is that we are saying 10% threshold that cannot be exceeded if it is to avoid having disparate impact. So the way, and I'll have an example here in a second, but the way that we measure that impact is that we are taking the, for example, for a service reduction, we're going to figure out who is negatively impacted by that service reduction and figure out the minority percentage of that group. And if that percentage is more than 10% higher than the system-wide average, that would be considered a disparate impact. So we're trying to make sure that the negative impacts of a change are not disproportionately felt by a certain minority group. That's kind of the crux of what we're talking about here. Likewise, if we're talking about an improvement, we want to make sure the benefits of the proposed change are shared equitably so that we don't have a situation where only a small number of minority individuals are benefiting from an improvement compared to the system-wide average. So that's kind of how we assess that threshold. And if we do identify a disparate impact, we need to identify alternatives that achieve the same benefit with less impact, that don't have disparate impact. So just as a very high level example, this is not Alexandria. I kind of just made up a route and it's in DC, but it's not a real route. So don't worry, this is not an actual proposal. But we're saying transit agency A is proposing to reroute line X as shown above. So the red is the existing line X alignment, and the agency wants to realign it to the blue section. So they do their analysis. Well, first of all, they determine that this is a major service change. We're going to assume this is probably above 25%, or maybe it's controversial. So they do have to do an analysis. And so what we're going to assume for this example is that when we look at the population of the area that is being negatively impacted, the area where service is being discontinued, we see that there's 61.2% of that group are minority. Whereas the area average of this fictitious city is 48%. So when you do the delta there, you're seeing that there's a 13% higher impact on minority individuals, passengers, than there is for the entire system average. So that would raise a red flag, and that would exceed our 10% threshold. And we would need to go back to the drawing board and figure out if there's a less or a more equitable way to reroute or make this reroute, or maybe we just need to reconsider the reroute altogether. So that's the example, and the similar one is the disproportionate burden. which is a similar procedure, but instead of for minority passengers, for low-income passengers. So again, we're trying to figure out if the change has a disproportionate burden on low-income passengers with a 10% threshold, which I should note is pretty consistent. Many other agencies have done similar policies, and 10% is usually the generally accepted threshold that is used. For service reductions, again, we want to make sure that the percentage of low-income percentage of the group that is negatively affected by the service reduction is not more than 10% of the system-wide average. And if we do find a disproportionate burden, we should identify alternatives and or take steps to mitigate the impact. So in the same example that I used before, maybe ignore the numbers here because that's obviously would be a disparate impact. But if we were just looking at low income, you can see that the section that is being discontinued has 25% low income, whereas the area average is 21%. So there's only a 4% difference, which means that it would not exceed the 10% threshold, and we would not consider this to have a potentially disproportionate burden impact on low income riders. So that's kind of how the analysis is done. If you were looking at fares, you would need to dig into how the change in fares, you'd be looking at your entire system basically, and who would if you tried to introduce a certain pass, who would benefit from that pass, or if you increased fares, who would be negatively affected by that increase in fares. So you would do the same type of analysis, just not with a map. It would be more of a kind of a spreadsheet analysis. So I will go ahead and wrap it up with just outreach and next steps. We've got our community meeting, this is what we're doing, the community meeting right now. And then we also have a public hearing a week from next Wednesday, which is Wednesday, March 9th, which is at our board meeting for March. There will be a hearing at the beginning of that board meeting. So if you'd like to speak to the board about this or anything else, please make sure you're there at 5:30. Please also register in advance on our website. And then I also wanted to highlight that all these materials, like I said, are available on our website, dashbus.com/title6. You can also provide feedback through the website. You can provide feedback to dashbus@alexandriava.gov. Again, dashbus@alexandriava.gov is the email address to use, or at our customer service line, 703-746-DASH, which is 3274. And written feedback is due by February 25th, which is this coming Friday. So really appreciate it if you have any feedback to get in as soon as you can. So if we need to make any changes to the policies, we can do that in advance of the board meeting next month. So with that, this is just the timeline. I think I pretty much covered this. We're going to the board in March to consider their adoption, and they'll go to City Council in April for the overall Title VI program adoption. So I'll end it there and see if we have any questions or comments or feedback. And we've got some hands raised. So I can't see everybody, so I might need to rely on Whitney or Caitlin to help call out names.
Sure. I think, Jim just lowered his hand. So Bonnie's hand is raised. So Bonnie O'Day, go ahead and unmute yourself and you're welcome to ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I just had a comment. Well, first of all, thank you very much for proposing these policies. I think your attention to equitable provision of transit based on race, et cetera, is commendable. I just had one specific improvement to suggest. I'm a member of the DASH Advisory Committee, as you know, and at our meeting on January 5th, City staff member Chris Zyman gave a presentation on compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act at bus stops. And I submitted written comments that showed that the percentage of people from minority backgrounds in Virginia is higher than among Caucasians. I'm sorry, the percentage of people from minority backgrounds with disabilities tends to be higher than among Caucasians. And so my comment was that that the ability to board the bus without impediments at bus stops is crucial to those with mobility and other impairments. And so I am just requesting that when you look at making improvements to improve the accessibility of bus stops, that should be a metric in your service standards. So other than that, I didn't have any other comments, and I thought you did a really good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, and thank you for your service on the DASH Advisory Committee. We really appreciate it. And your comment, I've noted it down. You know, we do have things coming up like, you know, we've got additional bus shelters that we're trying to install. And as you mentioned, the city is trying to improve accessibility to bus stops. So your comment about making sure that we are using an equity lens and making sure that we are looking at places that could have higher percentages of those with mobility impairments is well taken, and I'm going to pass that along.
Jim, I see your hand is raised and it kind of keeps going down too, but if you've got a question or a comment, feel free to go ahead and share.
Thank you. Hi, Martin. My name is Jim Page. I live here in Cameron Station. A great presentation. My question has to do with the schools. How do you merge your schedule with the school buses to make it easier for kids to get to school? Or do you?
So for the most part, that's not a consideration for most of our bus routes. We don't have the ability to coordinate with school buses in their schedule. The one exception that I would note is that we do for ACHS, Maine High School, you know, we do have a large number of students coming to and from ACHS from places across the city. So we do add 1 or 2 extra buses at key times right after release time, for example. We do have to add an extra bus here and there, or sometimes we use one of those longer 60-foot bendy buses to make sure that we're not seeing overcrowding. But we coordinate with a lot of other transit agencies like Metrobus,
Right.
like Fairfax, but not the schools. Unfortunately, it's a bit difficult.
Lastly, I serve on the CHIP with Mrs. Mahan, and this is good information for what we're trying to do for health. So thank you for the presentation.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay. So any other, I think we mostly been focusing on Title VI, but happy to take any other questions relating to DASH service. And anything you have about, you know, questions about fares, the network, electric buses, anything you have, we're happy to take those questions.
Hi, Martin. Martin.
Hi.
This is Jean again. And Jim, let me say hello. It was good to see your name coming up and hear your questions, which are always on point. I'm just wondering if anyone at DASH has seen or is familiar with the Community Health Improvement Plan, which we rolled out last year, and it's in operation right now. Would that be something that would be helpful in your seeing? I would encourage it, not just because I was part of it like Jim, but I think it would be a good coordination across the city for us to know what we're all doing. And the point that Bonnie brought out of looking at bus service from the lens of equity from different perspectives of that word, I think is commendable and very important. So if that's something that would be helpful, we can get a copy or a link to you and Wendy and the other people in DASH. And I haven't spoken to Alan Lomax, who is the chair of the Partnership for a Healthier Alexandria, but perhaps it might be useful, and you can think about this. You have another community presentation, but if you might be interested in wanting to do a condensed or presentation to the entire Partnership for a Healthy Alexandria Steering Committee, that's something else I can pursue if it would be useful for you. But I would recommend, if you haven't, that we get you a link or a copy of the CHIP.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm not familiar, and that's fault of my own. So yeah, if you could, I don't know if you can access the chat. Is there a chat feature?
No, there isn't. But Martin, Caitlin Beisel, who is on this call as well, she is going to be sending you an email. So if
Okay,
you would just respond to that email with any information that you can share, that would be great.
perfect. I'll be glad to. As I
Thank
said,
you.
this is the Health of Alexandria is the coordination and concern for each of us. So as often as we can, galvanate and maximize our resources, I think it's better on our learning and also for the entire city. So I'll be more than happy to respond to that email. And I'll probably reach out also to my colleague and very informative buddy, Jim Page, to see if I've overlooked anything.
Yeah, that sounds like we're all pushing towards the same thing, get more people out of their cars and better options for non-single occupancy vehicle travel around with bikes or buses or whatever it is.
Martin, I have one quick question about your policy on celebrations and advertising. Does Dash acknowledge African American or Hispanic Week? Do you do that as part of your outreach?
I would, Whitney would probably be the best person to answer that. She's our marketing and communications manager.
Sorry, I couldn't quite catch the question. Do you mind repeating it, Jim?
Yeah, do you acknowledge Hispanic American Week or Black History Month? Any of those?
Yes, yes.
And how do we do so?
We do. We actually acknowledge. We acknowledge it on social media.
Okay.
But both actually, and additional. Any time we get a chance to acknowledge our community members, we try and do so.
I'd like to talk to you offline because there are some opportunities for education and health to merge on a bus when you talk about the porter strike and all those kind of things that are transportation related. So I think your bus can be a mobile classroom for our kids, given just a little bit of thought. And I'd like to talk to you about it more, Mark.
Sure. I'll get you my information.
Great. Okay. Any other questions about any of the goings on at Dash? I can tell you that we've got something coming up. The most recent news is that we are resuming full weekday service starting on Monday. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I know, big struggle for the last 2 months. We've been short staffed, so we had to reduce to Saturday schedules on a lot of routes, but we are able to get back to full service now. So we're very excited about that, and hopefully that'll be a great benefit to the community. And then I can also tell you that we'll be coming back out to the public in a couple weeks with our FY23 Transit Development Plan, which is our annual service plan that outlines what we'll be doing in terms of service changes for the following year. FY23 starts July 1st, so we're talking about changes that could go into effect as early as this summer. So we're excited about that, and we'll look forward to hopefully seeing some of you during that process as well. But check back to dashbus.com, follow us on social media, and subscribe to our newsletter to get the latest on all of the latest Dash updates and information. Okay. Anything else, Whitney? Whitney, you there?
I am here. Sorry, I was making sure that my camera was working. Sorry about that. No, I don't have anything else. I just want to again thank everyone for attending this evening, for your wonderful questions. It was great. I also want to give a shout out to Bonnie O'Day. Thank you for joining us. She's a member of our advisory committee. So thank you for joining us this evening. And as Martin already mentioned, if you have any additional questions or want any more information, I again direct you to dashbus.com or the Title VI page directly at dashbus.com/Title VI. And again, that information is available in both Spanish and Amharic. So Martin, thank you for the informative presentation, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.